may have seen me talk about this online, in that this is one of my favourite topics to talk about. Not just topics, but this particular session. This session has gone through a bit of an evolution over time. It's been delivered in person, it's been delivered online. But the real goal of this session is to talk about data in a way that doesn't start with the line, L&D needs to be more like insert data-related field here. Because I think that kind of thinking, whilst well-intentioned, has done an awful lot of damage to our relationship with data. Because rather than telling us, hey, there are these skills that we can learn that will make us better at our jobs, it's built this sense of it's another thing we have to learn. Not only do we need to be like product, not only do we need to be like marketing, not only do we need to be like business management and finance, we now need to be data analysts or data scientists as well. And nothing could be further from the truth. Because actually, our relationship with data is not the same as the business intelligence team or a data analytics team or a data scientist. Nor should it be. That's not our job. This session is not going to talk to you about building complex prediction models or anything like that. And instead, it's going to talk in really practical terms about how we can use data to make better decisions. Not some hypothetical data, but stuff that we've actually got. The point is to get you thinking about your relationship with data, to get you thinking about what data is available to you and what isn't, and why that situation is what it is. So with all of that in mind, the obvious place for us to start this conversation is in the wonderful world of bees. Bees, to my mind, are the ultimate communicators of data. Is anyone, and just let me know in the chat, is anyone here familiar with the concept, when I'm talking about bees, of the waggle dance? Excellent, yes, lots of people coming in, fantastic. So just in case anyone here is unfamiliar with this, bees communicate in this incredible, well, they communicate in a range of ways. Really, this is going to be oversimplified because there's a lot of variance between different types of bee and depending on where they are in the world and all this kind of thing. There are solitary bees that don't live in a hive. We're going to focus very specifically on what you might call the standard bee or the honeybee living within a hive in a fairly normal circumstance, i.e., they don't consider themselves to be in massive danger at the moment. At which point their primary sort of means of communication is something called the waggle dance. They use this to communicate a whole range of things, but probably most impressively, where food is located. Now that doesn't sound particularly impressive because we would go, it's located in Tesco's or Sainsbury's or whatever your shop of choice is. But for a bee, this is incredibly complicated because bees fall into, broadly, two groups. And interestingly, they split, again, in a generalised sense, in this 80-20 split that we so often see in the world. Now, 80% of bees follow what the waggle dance tells them to do. So, for instance, the bees do their waggle dance, and the waggle dance is basically a series of movements, some noise, the release of some pheromones, which is complicated in of itself, thus it's a dance. But what it does is say, hey, there's food over here. Now, whether that's nectar or resin or whatever, but it doesn't just say over here. It includes an extraordinary amount of information. It includes things like how to get there, what dangers you will encounter along the way, things you need to avoid. That's quite a lot of information. We might, struggle to put that concisely in a WhatsApp, yet bees manage it in a dance. Look into that what you will about the human inability to communicate. But I mentioned only 80% of bees follow this. 80% of bees go out, follow the waggle dance, go where they're told, do the waggle dance to spread the message, go back to the hive, continue. But you can probably see the problem with that and why it's limited to 80%. Because if 100% of bees did that, what would happen when that food source runs out? So, the 20% of bees who don't follow the waggle dance, They don't ignore it. They see it, they hear it, they take in that information and they say, cool, there's food there, there's food there, there's food there. The waggle dance is telling me nothing about this area over here, so that's where I'm going. They are explorer bees. They come with little hats and... No, they don't. But it'd be cool if they did. They're explorer bees. They go out and they look at the gaps in the data. They are the epitome of what can seem like a pedantic difference, but I think is important. Whilst 80% of the bees' behaviour is data-driven, these explorer bees are data-informed. They've taken in all this information, identified a gap, and have gone forth to investigate it. And most of them die, alone and cold. But the ones that don't discover new sources of food, or identify potential threats to the hive and report back. And so the waggle dance evolves to bring in this new data generated by these bees. We talked a lot about bees so far, and I realise this is, not really the topic you came here for. But hopefully you are seeing the link emerge. And that is that there is a real danger, to my mind, in being data-driven. And that is that data is a perfect snapshot of the past. Data, when collected well, and assuming you have good data, and we'll touch on more about what I mean by good data later, you have a perfect capturing of what happened, and maybe within that data you have the means to understand why it happened and how it happened and what else could have happened, but you do not know what is going to happen. And sometimes the certainty of knowing, the guaranteed accuracy of the past, can make us feel very safe and very secure and very certain of a decision that we've made, because it's always been this way. And for a certain length of time, that will work until all of a sudden, there's no food left in that area. Or for whatever reason, it doesn't work anymore. And so, we look to those who are data informed, those who are looking at that same data, looking at that same perfect capturing of the past and saying, great, here's the things this isn't telling me. Let me go and find out more. And I would suggest, and what we're going to look at today, is that that's where we need to be. That needs to be our relationship with data. When I talk about data-informed decision-making, it is exactly that. It's data-informed, data being one consideration in what we are making our decision based upon, not the only one. If the data says the most effective thing to do is to paint the wall blue, that does not necessarily mean we should paint the wall blue. It just means that in the past, that has proven to be the most effective thing. Fairly simple, I know, but it's good to all start in the same place. So now I want to turn things around a little bit and ask you a quick question. Where is your data coming from? In your role, thinking about the data that you have access to, where is it coming from? Let me know down in the chat. What have we got? Assessments, post-training surveys, nice. People systems. LXP, HR platforms, the LMS, learners, managers, business leaders, records of all kinds. Interesting. Call center metrics, post-training. Brilliant. Okay, so I run these sessions, not this session particularly, but data-related sessions with a lot of L&D teams. And so what I've done in some of these sections is pull together what we've observed when working with these different organizations. And these are mostly kind of enterprise scale organizations, mostly operating in sort of 2+ countries around the world. But where we have worked with smaller organisations, we have seen similar threads come through, but for obvious reasons, they tend to be at a much smaller scale and so are slightly more difficult to generalise. Broadly speaking, there are kind of four sources that I tend to think about in terms of data. The first one in our world is very much this sense of what I describe as learning data. Now, this is our LMS, our LXP, our people platform stuff. It tends to measure activity. So-and-so has completed a course, they've scored this, they've done that, they've completed this CPD activity. And there is a tendency to consider this data less important. I'm a big fan of labeling data accurately, and I would agree with most people when I say I would class these as vanity metrics, but I would disagree with perhaps the generalization that vanity metrics aren't useful. I think they have a use, but we have to acknowledge what that use is and what the limitations of this data are. There's a correctness in there somewhere, you can choose where it's for you. The worst thing we can do is think that there is one magic piece or type of data that tells us everything in all contexts. All data is limited in some way. And the important thing for us is to, yes, look at all the data, but understand what we can apply things to. So applying activity data, input data, learning data, and saying, well, that's about performance, is incredibly dangerous. The assumption that someone's done 30 hours of training, wow, they must be performing really well. Must they? Maybe they're terrible at their job and their manager thinks the solution is to make them sit on the LMS till they're better. This, unfortunately, is something I've seen, maybe you've seen it as well. There is a real danger of oversimplifying these kind of groupings of data. So learning data, often referred to as vanity metrics, incredibly valuable in terms of understanding our own activity. If we're creating content, are people doing it? Now, them doing it may not tell us anything about the kind of what they're converting that into in the workplace, but it is giving us the next step, because if we're creating something and no one's doing it, we have a problem. A different problem to if they're doing it and nothing's getting better, but still a problem that we might need to look into and fix. The value of those vanity metrics, of the LMS data, may not be in tracking performance or impact, but can be in terms of tracking user experience, in terms of understanding why content is ineffective, in terms of understanding if people are able to find your content. The number of situations I've gone into where we've been ignoring that data, nothing's moving forwards, the L&D team's putting a horrendous amount of effort in, and no one's ever gone, the search logs on your LMS, have you ever looked at them? No, why would we look at the search logs? Because it will tell you what people are searching for. And sure enough, they're searching for all the issue areas that exist in the business. And yet none of the content is tagged sufficiently for the terrible search engines attached to most LMSs to find the right pieces of content. The L&D team have done all the hard work. They've identified the real problem, created content that should work and may work, but missed that last step, and so allowed their terrible search engine internally to make sure no one can actually make use of their effort. That data is incredibly useful when used in the right context, dangerous when used in the wrong context. So then we have reaction data and response data. So these are our, again, often maligned happy sheets, surveys, sort of the I rate this course 5 stars, and the one type of data I have very little time for is the classic kind of, would you recommend this e-learning to your colleagues? Because of course that's what we do in our spare time. We're like, have you done that piece of e-learning on GDPR? Oh, you'll love it. Take some time on a Sunday in the bath and just relax and drift away on it. No. If we're going to recommend something to each other, as Microsoft will tell you, it'll be an operating system, not a piece of e-learning. For those who don't get that joke, Microsoft often ask, would you recommend Windows to your family and friends? And there's a kind of ongoing techie joke of, we need you to understand that. No one recommends operating systems to their families and friends. And if they did, it wouldn't be Windows. Only Linux users recommend operating systems. You'll notice that. So reaction data. What does reaction data tell us and not tell us? So again, we cannot use I really enjoyed this course. I think I'll use this course a lot. I plan to put this into action by doing the following. None of that is impact data. And this is sometimes where we get our relationship with these different types of data horribly wrong. We moved on from happy sheets, which is great. We no longer just go, hey, they gave us a 5 out of 5, this training was effective. We kind of know that. But I often see among teams the idea that, well, they've said that they found this useful. They've said that they're going to put it into action, and they've said they're going to specifically do the following things different in their job because of this training. That's been successful. I say a lot of things. I have a lot of plans to put things into action. At one point, I was definitely going to never get up after 8 o'clock again because I wanted to make use of that time in the morning. I am never up before 8 a.m. If I am, I'm going to be asleep again by 10. So the intent in those surveys is fine. People do intend to do the things they say they're going to do, generally. Not always, people are people, but generally they do. But we can't take that as truth. We can't use that as impact data. Interestingly, this is one of the things that we see a lot at award entries as well. If you've ever considered putting your work forwards for any of the kind of learning technologies awards or things like that, you'll quite often see this kind of data used as proof of impact. So it's a pretty broad misconception. This can give us an indication of that immediate reaction. How has this landed? Not what it's achieved, not what changes happened, just what it's achieved. It's also massively perception-based. So we all know that if we go out with a survey, depending on the area of the business you send it into, you may or may not get any responses. Certain parts of the business you work for may be very difficult to get feedback from. Others may be very willing to give feedback, and perhaps it's really good, fair feedback, and perhaps they have a gripe with your department and always have done, and they're difficult in that sense. We're not supposed to say that bit out loud. Everyone's lovely to work with and we're all one big team, blah, blah, blah. But in the real world, we all know that there's that team or that department or that manager that you're just like, oh, a request for their team? Great. And you know it's going to be an uphill battle, and things like reaction data is going to be wildly out of line with what you get in other places. So anything that is perception-based data should be treated, in my mind, very, very carefully. It's valuable, but we must always remind ourselves that it is not accurate. It can't be accurate. Perception is inherently fungible or individualized. It's very difficult, usually when you look through reaction data, to get a cohesive message. The classic one, I always remember, we rolled out a great big program and people got very excited. It was getting very good initial responses. And there was a question in there about the visual design of the course, because they were trying something wildly different. They had gone from a very kind of photo heavy, kind of old school compliance training look and feel to something quite new, quite, for them out there, for us probably all quite tame, kind of illustrative approach. But they were getting these bizarre comments about how the illustrations were the best thing they've ever seen, or really detrimental to the learning experience, or they would prefer it if they were in this style or that style. And people were sending them in like hand-drawn pictures of their own illustrations that they think would be better for the course. Asking this question opened up a real problem for this L&D department, because once you've elicited feedback, you kind of have to do something with it or justify ignoring it entirely. And if you're going to ignore it entirely, why did you ask the question? So when you're thinking about perception-based data and the perception-based data that you might choose to gather, think very, very carefully about what perception-based data you're actually interested in. It's a lovely idea to involve people in like a visual design change, But if you've made the decision to change the look and feel of your entire approach to digital learning, opening that up to critique from people who, are very competent in what they do, but what they do is not the design of effective learning materials, is probably not a good use of your time, effort, energy, or actually theirs. And the one thing that came out of those conversations actually was that managers were not particularly happy that their people were wasting their time offering feedback on the visual design of an e-learning course. That is not a good use of most people's time. So the last thing I tend to think about a lot is siloed data. And this, for me, is where I start to get a little bit excited. And this actually is the biggest area of change. When I first ran this session a year and a half ago, which doesn't seem that long ago, but your responses earlier about where you get your data show how much has changed. Almost every response a year and a half ago was the LMS, the LXP, surveys, focus groups, maybe a couple of very forward-looking teams would come back with the HRM, things like that. Now I was seeing things in there about the business data. That is a relatively recent change from most L&D departments. Often, and I refer to it as siloed data for this reason, that stuff does not live in the same place as, for instance, the learning data or the perception-based data. Or the reaction data, sorry. Siloed data tends to be held by the operations department, the finance team, the business intelligence team, the marketing team. Now, the biggest difference there actually is the business intelligence team. They tend to be a bit better at kind of hooks in and drawing it out of everywhere. Though even then, most large organizations that I would go into, you'd speak to the business intelligence team and go, oh, great, so have you got connections with the L&D team? They'd just be like, nope, they don't have any data, do they? They don't use data much. It's like, oh, they have loads. And they would really benefit from what you've got. Most data in most organizations that I've observed is siloed. Certainly the most valuable data is siloed. And that's partially by design. We often think silos are inherently bad, that things should flow freely through an organization, and that will help everyone. Well, it helps everyone until there's a cybersecurity attack. There are very good reasons some types of data are siloed. Now, that doesn't always mean you can't get access to them, but it does mean that you may have to put some effort in. And I can't stress this enough. The biggest reason we have a data shortage of good quality data, we usually have a lot of terrible data in L&D, is our own fault. It's a lack of effort put in, not just this year, last year, whatever, but over decades of the industry collectively deciding that we don't need that strong a relationship with the BI team. We don't need to be hooked into the finance data. We don't need to pay attention to the operational and manufacturing data being gathered by the ops team. A lot of this has come about, to my mind, as we've pushed further and further away from being a function of HR and into our own department. Probably a good thing, I think I've come down on the side of anyway. But we've lost a lot of those ties into other departments that perhaps before were handled for us. So I would really encourage you to think about where in your business is there data that you don't have access to. So for instance, sales data. If you're working in an environment, if you're training people whose main job it is to generate revenue for the organization by selling something, if you do not have regular access to sales reports by department and function and timescale and product, how can you possibly try and train people? If you work in a manufacturing environment and you don't have live data on defect rates and production numbers and staff turnover, how on earth can you train that workforce effectively? And yet the vast majority of organizations I go into have no proactive access to this data. They wait for someone to come to them with a training request and then ask them to bring them the data to back up the training request. And when we say, why are we order takers? Because we've chosen to be. Again, collectively, not individually. I've met phenomenal people. There are probably people on this call screaming, but I do it the right way. And I get that that's painful, but we have to acknowledge that we are the current representative of our seat, and the history of L&D in your business may not be what you do today. The history of our industry certainly does not paint us with a positive light on this. So we have to put that effort in to be looking at that data proactively. Not to be waiting for someone to go, defect rates have risen for the last 3 months. We should be seeing a defect rate go up ever so slightly and be like, monitor that. If that doesn't immediately drop down as a blip, we need to start thinking about what's changed. We should be looking at active data, live data in our business, and conducting an ongoing needs analysis. This is sometimes called like a potential threat analysis among the L&D teams that are really leading the way on this. A lot of these are kind of in tech manufacturing environments where the L&D teams are absolutely not interested in training requests. They are looking at live data day to day and looking for, why is that defect rate going up? What's happened there? Why is that line going in that direction? Whether it's sales, manufacturing, whatever. They are never waiting for a problem to reach the point where a senior leader is asking for a training solution. They are forever monitoring the live situation. Now that is, I will say, it's incredibly rare. And it's not easy to do. But it is, I would suggest, the ideal end state of our relationship with data. That data is not used to back up a request, and data is not just relied upon and only introduced to the conversation to justify what we've done. It is used to inform what we do, where we put our focus, and where we spend our energy. So when we look at learning, reaction, siloed and perception-based data, these are kind of conceptual groupings as opposed to exact groupings. And that's by design, because data is inherently contextual. And the data that exists in your organization will not be the same as the data that exists in another organization. The data that is captured will be different. The way it's captured will be different. The data that's deemed to matter to the organization will be different. A prime example of this is I was working with a big courier delivery organization a few years ago, and I flagged to them their turnover data, that it was huge. Like they were turning over something like 60% of delivery people a year. And they were not even remotely concerned about this. That was just that's how we operate. That's fine. What looks like a big red flag in data in one place is not a problem to another organization. Now, in that instance, whether or not that's good is another question entirely, but bear in mind that all data is contextual. Thus, these are held at conceptual level so that you can apply them to your organization's specifics. Within all of this, there is, of course, the whole quantitative and qualitative data. So quantitative data, we're talking about numbers. And then the other, we're talking about kind of thoughts, feelings, language, where you have to, do a bit more analysis. The inevitable question that comes up in these sessions is, which one should I focus on? The answer is both. You can't do one without the other. Well, one informs the other. Your numbers should be backed up by your sentiment. If they're not, you investigate that. Your sentiment, is usually quite difficult to get to the bottom of, and so you're probably going to want to have numbers to back it up. But I don't want to spend too long on that because what I really want to focus on is less on the specific data points and more on one of the 3 key takeaways from this session, which is methodology matters. I've spoken a lot in that first section there about this history of L&D maybe not getting this right. That we have to deal with that fact often in these conversations, in that we're not necessarily trusted with data, we're not perceived as a data-informed function. That's why methodology matters, and not just a methodology that exists in our heads, not just a methodology that we follow most of the time, but an actual documented methodology. Something we can put in front of a data information department or an IT team or a cybersecurity team or a senior leader and say, this is how your training and development function interacts with the data in this organization. This is where the data lives. This is where it's sourced from. This is why we have access to it. And this is what we use it for. When we say we've analysed the data, what have we done? What have we analysed? How have we analysed it? Who did the analysis? Was it machine analysis? Was it human? When we say the data tells us this, what are we talking about? Correlation? Causation? How strong? How weak? How certain are we? Our relationship with data is only as useful to us as the strength of our methodology. Our methodology is what says to the world, we know what we're doing, and if you want to understand what we're doing, here it is. It's laid out for you. You can trust us. You can trust us with the data, and you can trust us to make the right decisions. Now, when I say a documented methodology, often sort of organizations start to worry about, oh my God, this is going to be a huge piece of work, blah, 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 blah. We can be talking about two sides of A4 here. This does not need to be a huge thing because 9 times out of 10, we're not doing the world's most complicated piece of data analysis. Realistically, we're probably at the extreme end of data analysis going to consider something like a regression analysis. The idea behind regression analysis is that you put in your variables and you see, the one that's moving in the right or wrong direction, whatever, what else is changing as that changes. You're basically trying to answer the question of, so defects started going up, what changed when that change happened? And you look back through your data and you go, oh, well, it's the defect rate keeps going up on a Friday afternoon. Why? Oh, everyone's going out to the pub on Friday at lunchtime. There you go. That's massively oversimplified example there, but a piece of regression analysis will help you identify where those data points intersect and what may be impacting other pieces of data. Historically, of course, something like regression analysis has, for most of us, certainly for me, not been viable without going to someone in your organization who is kind of the data person. First of all, that's a really great solution to doing this, to building a methodology, to carrying it out. Your methodology could be, we identify questions and we go to the data information team or the business intelligence team and we ask them to create a report for us. That is a perfectly reasonable approach to working with data. If you do not have the resources or the technology to do the analysis yourself, why on earth would you not use your business's inbuilt resource and function? Assuming you do, or perhaps, like myself, you work outside businesses or across organizations, we should be looking for pieces of technology that allow us to do this kind of analysis. Tableau's a good example. I hesitate to suggest it, but your AI options of LLMs are getting better. It's still an LLM doing analysis. You cannot trust it. But it may point you in the right direction. My suggestion is to, 1 in 3 or 4 do yourself, or do human if you're going to go down the AI route. Otherwise, you run the risk of never really knowing if it's accurate. But broadly speaking, I've found the OpenAI models and the Anthropic models pretty reliable on simple things like regression analysis up to 5 or 6 variables. And certainly very simple stuff like pulling out things like correlation values. So when we talk about correlation, causation, sorry, I should have checked when I was speaking about it before. Is everyone here pretty comfortable with the idea of correlation versus causation? I will just let you, yeah. Cool. And that it's not complex, but I'm always aware that if you're brand new to using data at all, it may be something that's new to you. Just on the note of correlation and causation, we should not be overly comfortable just saying, oh, they correlate, or oh, there's a causal link there. We should be quantifying these things. So generally, these models, if it says, oh, I would like you to measure the correlation between something, you'll get a number between 0 and 1 with an R in front of it. An R0 being there is effectively no measurable correlation. Then up to 1 is a positive correlation, and down to -1 is a negative correlation. So should they allow you to quantify how certain you are of that correlation, how strong that correlation is? If you ever just see sentences like, oh, there's a clear correlation between, that is missing something important. Because a clear correlation, positive or negative correlation, and how clear? 0.1 or 1? Because that's a serious difference. 0.1 could be margin of error. That could be another week's worth of data swings that to a 0 or a -1. Whereas if you're getting an R, 0.99, that's as close to a guaranteed correlation as you're going to get. That's a strong correlation. If you're not used to hearing correlation given a number, that probably indicates that wherever that information's coming from is not getting into the data enough to make the claim in the first place, or they're not giving you all the information you need. So whenever we're making a correlative, or probably more importantly, a kind of causal link claim, we should always be including those sort of quantitative values to say, this is how strong, this is how certain we are. With causal claims, it's a D because it's a distribution rather than an R rating. But effectively, it's still the same, up to 1 and down to -1. Showing certainty. Including those in the information you provide people should be part of your methodology. So I just realized we hadn't touched on that, so I wanted to make sure we cover that. So this session primarily focuses on how we get from all this data, all this analysis, all this regression that we've done, to a decision, to action. So how do we make that jump? Now, I'm not a huge fan of models, pyramids, all that jam. But this is kind of one that I was taught very early on. I still find it incredibly useful in terms of all this data can be overwhelming, especially when it's good data. When you've got all that business data, all the perception data, everything telling you the same thing. You've got those correlative and causative data points. You've got clear, strong correlations or proven causations. And it still shouldn't be the only thing you're considering. And so, at Evolve, we talk about D.I.A.L. D.I.A.L is, I would say, a process about data, but really it's just a decision-making process. But we refer to it as our data-informed decision-making process, exactly because it considers data as one input of many. Now, the first stage of D.I.A.L, as you might accept, is D for discover. And that means starting with human insights. When we see that something is not going well, we start with the people involved in the activity. We don't start by going to an SME, we don't start by going to a senior leader, we don't start by going to a line manager. We see a problem developing in the workplace, or we become aware of a problem that is there around performance, and we go to the people doing the job, and we observe, and we interview, and we have conversations. And we discuss with them what is actually going on the ground. At this point, we actually don't really care what the perception of what's going on is, and we don't particularly care what should be going on. What we care about is fully understanding what is happening on the ground, the reality in which the performance is occurring. Then we start looking at organisational goals. We start looking at the process that should be happening. We start talking to line managers, SMEs, stakeholders, senior leaders. This then gives us a really good sense of, on a human basis, in terms of the people whether they're doing the job, whether they're leading the company. What's their kind of take on the situation? What are their inputs? Do their inputs have value is the other question. I tend to find that the further up the ladder they are, the answer becomes more likely no. They may be very interested, they may care very deeply, they may have nothing of value to add. But once we've gathered those human insights, we start our investigation. And this is where we start looking at what I put under the umbrella of data. Now, there is a solid argument to say everything we just gathered was data. It was human data. I like to have the separation because I tend to think that having the conversations and gathering the insights from people is kind of a little bit different to looking at them. So now basically we're going to render all those conversations, those observations into data. We're going to start considering them as points of fact. We're going to say, well, they said this and they said that. This many people said that, but this many people said this over here. We're going to start quantifying the themes of what came out. 30% of people that we spoke to were really unhappy, but actually only 10% of them were aware there was a performance problem going on at all. There's an interesting little stat. No one will have said, oh, only 10% of us know this, but we discovered that quantifiable fact through those conversations. So we start to quantify generally through things like thematic analysis. The basic idea being you look at everything that was said, all the things we discussed, you pull out the reoccurring themes, the reoccurring topics, the reoccurring language, you start grouping them together. I quite enjoy doing this as card sorting on a Figma or a Miro board. I'll chuck up all the comments, all the things, and I'll just start dragging them around. If you're using something like R as a statistics analysis software, or a ChatGPT or a Claude, they can do these for you as well. They can conduct thematic analysis. I don't, if I'm honest, fully trust it, because there is a lot of nuance in how different people articulate a point. So the tone of voice they use when they said it might inform your understanding of what they said in a way that an LLM will not pick up on. So be very careful when asking AI to analyze the meaning of something someone said. It's actually, I would argue, much better at dealing with absolutes. What does the process say? What should be happening? And what does the kind of quantitative number-based data say? Rather than, what did this person mean when they said they want to kill their manager some days? Because I guarantee you they don't mean exactly that. And their tone of voice probably gave that away, as well as the slight kind of smile they had when they said it. It's unlikely that we need to be deeply concerned that there's going to be a homicide in the workplace. Never a zero chance, but unlikely. But LLMs will misinterpret that because it's not what they're designed to do. Oh, we've got a message coming through, so I have to leave the meeting uninspected. Sorry. Oh, no worries. If you do have to leave, don't worry. We're going to share the recording. That's absolutely fine. The email will come out to you tomorrow. So yeah, as we go into this investigate stage, this is where we're introducing our quantitative data, our numbers. We're starting to really sort of bring together our human sources, our quantitative sources, and we are introducing our own professional knowledge, our intuition, our understanding that we bring as learning and development professionals, which is not invalidated because it doesn't come in a spreadsheet. I consider the most valuable asset I bring to every organisation that I work with the fact that I have worked for so many other organisations and seen so many different implementations to try and resolve problems. That history of knowing that, oh, in that particular context, that works really well, and here's why, allows me to make better decisions wherever I go in future. Seeing something fail in one organisation gives me the ability to look out for red flags about where else it might fail, or where those red flags don't exist and where it might succeed. Our knowledge, our professional background, our intuition as professionals is valuable and should be a consideration when making data-informed decisions. Those are data as much as our user interviews are, and as much as our spreadsheets of performance data are. Again, they do not invalidate the other two, just as they don't invalidate that. So we've now got these three sources. Our contextualized human input from our people in the organization, our, if you like, hard data, our facts, the performance reports, the learning data, the perceptive data, and then we have our knowledge, our intuition, our professionalism coming into the pot. Our three big considerations. You may notice that the investigation stage here is the same 3 points as the evidence-informed practice model. If you're unfamiliar with evidence-informed practice, you should totally check it out. It kind of spins off from the world of kind of medical practitioners and Miriam Nealon and, I forget who she wrote the book with, and that's terrible. I apologise, I haven't got it on the shelf today. Oh yeah, I do, it's down there. Miriam Nealon and Paul Kirshner, that's it. Miriam Nealon and Paul Kirshner wrote a book on it, published by Kogan Page, Evidence-Informed Learning Design. Phenomenal book, well worth checking out. They have like a 3-star model around it, really, really good stuff. So with all those three in place, we move on to A for adjust. Looking at all those three things, we're looking for insights that challenge our existing understanding, because we need to now blend this hard data with our professional view and with our human insight. They need to come together, they need to coalesce to give us a clear vision of the world that we're trying to work in. And where they don't come together, where they clash, where they don't agree, is where we plant a flag and say, investigate more. Ask more questions. We are actively looking for the gaps and the misalignments in the data. Because where the numbers say one thing and the people say another, there is a need to investigate. We must not make an assumption that if the numbers say one thing and the people say another, the people are fallible, the numbers aren't, so the numbers must be right. There is every chance that even if the numbers are technically right, they are being misinterpreted by us or by someone else. There is a chance that technically they are incorrectly captured. There is a chance that the human perception is incorrect. There is a chance that when we've tried to bring them all together, we have missed something that means they do align, but we have a missing step somewhere. We investigate to discover which of any of those or something else is true. And eventually we end up with a clear picture of what the problem is and the thing that we can change to improve the situation. Because the whole point of bringing together these three data sources is that they inherently guide us towards a solution whilst revealing the problem. Because as we come to understand the problem more, we see each of the individual components, the human, the environmental, and the systematic components that are impacting performance. At which point the final stage simply becomes leveraging what you've just learned. If you've just learned that the following things have happened after the lights in the workshop were changed, guess what you should change back? The lights in the workshop. Sometimes it is just that blaringly obvious. Sometimes it's not, at which point you've missed something and you have to go back to the start and redo discovery. But that's not failure. That's continuous improvement. It's also why, if we can adopt a proactive position, this model works really well. Because if we're always on the back foot taking an order and then trying to do this, well, it's easy to see why the business might say, we don't have time for analysis, just build us an e-learning. Just build us a workshop. Just build us a webinar. If we're proactive and say, there's something changing here, we need to understand it, start discovery. We don't have to rush it. We can figure out how we fit it in time-wise. But the more we work like that, the more we have more control over the work that's coming into our department, the more we are able to say to the business, we are a valuable partner, not only in saving the day, but actually preventing the day being in danger at all. This is one of those key things that allows us to step from being a cost center to a strategic partner without which the business could not operate effectively. The teams who are doing this, the teams that are getting in there amongst the live data, being proactive, are the teams who are not worried necessarily at the minute about, oh, well, will our team be seeing a reduced budget? Will our headcount be changed? Because they know that their business sees them doing this live, active reconnaissance. They know everything that's going on in their business, more or less. There's always a dark corner somewhere that no one knew about that blows up usually when a regulator pokes it with a stick. But broadly speaking, they know what's going on and they're actively trying to help all the time. But yeah, by the time you get to L, by the time we get to leverage, we should have revealed and understood the problem, and the levers that we can pull to change the situation should be obvious because we have found them in the data. We have found the causes of what's going on. We have found the things that are holding back performance or that have changed, that have pulled away perhaps something that was supporting performance before. So the leverage action should be the easiest stage, but it only works if you communicate the data. Second big learning point after spending ages talking about that model is that models do not matter. The takeaway from this is not, oh my God, you must go and use the D.I.A.L model whenever making decisions moving forwards. You must religiously go D.I.A.L every time you make a decision and never deviate from that. The important thing is that you are utilizing those three elements: the contextualized human input, the hard data from the organization, and your professional input. The rest of it, to be honest, is mutable. The important thing is that it works in your organization, not that you strictly follow something I put up on a slide that looks good because it's got 4 letters with little lines coming off it. It's helpful in discussing the ideas, but it's a bit like ADDIE. Very few high-performing L&D functions can go, oh yes, we're currently in the I phase of ADDIE, because they're too busy doing their, actual jobs to be worrying about which of the letters they are currently performing against. So the specific model does not matter. There are 101 data-informed decision-making models out there. D.I.A.L is just the one that I particularly like because it's easy to communicate. But there are some with 7, 8, 9 letters that break them down into much more kind of small stages. Pick the one that works for you. Don't worry about a model at all. If you think a methodology and the concept is enough for you and your team, that's fine too. The important thing is to do it, not to follow any one process. The next most important thing, of course, is to take credit, or, as we're supposed to call it, communicating data for influence. And I will just whip through this one really quickly because this is kind of the common sense element of this session, which is that when we communicate data, we should communicate with clarity, brevity, and prioritize storytelling and usefulness. Now, this sounds blaringly obvious, and yet the number of reports I have seen put together by L&D teams that lack an executive summary makes me want to weep. I do not care, even as someone who works in our industry, about how hard you've worked. I'm not going to read your whole report, and neither's any senior leader in your organisation. And whenever someone gets upset about that, I want them to ask themselves a single question. What does 1 minute of your CEO or your CLO's time cost? And would you be willing to pay for the time it takes for them to read your report out of your own pocket? If the answer is no, shut up and write a shorter report. That's blunt, perhaps a little rude, but I hold myself to that standard. I would not want to waste their time any more than I want them to waste my time with a 7-page training request for yet more wellness training, or well-being training, I should say. So when I say clarity, brevity, storytelling, and usefulness, what I'm really talking about is asking the question of the audience that I'm writing this for. What do they need to know? Do they need to know about how I've pulled together these sources and conducted this analysis and spent weeks doing this, that, and the next thing? No. What they need to know is that the data tells us that this is the problem and that this is the solution. This is how sure we are. If you're interested, you can find the data to back this up on page 17 of the redundant whatever blah blah blah. They're never going to look at that anyway unless you get something wrong, in which case having it there backs you up. The ability to communicate your data-informed decision with clarity, brevity, including a narrative, but the narrative not being about you and your effort, and prioritising the usefulness of the report to others, is an absolute game changer. You can tell it's 2025, game changer. You've got to say it at least once in a webinar. In terms of being trusted by your organisation. Not just in terms of then trusting your specific decision, but in terms of then trusting your broader mission, your broader involvement with the business. What this also allows you to do is make your reports useful to other departments. If you've just done all this analysis, I guarantee you will discover stuff that other people will find useful. So share it with them. Make your reports public. Make them available. If you're writing something in your report you don't want someone to read, you probably shouldn't write it. Be honest, be direct, but share them. Give them to the ops team. So when it highlights that, hey, we can fix the following things, but you have the following inefficiencies in a workflow, we aren't going to touch those with this lever, but you might want to consider it. They now know that. Maybe they already knew that, but now so does the rest of the business, so maybe they'll fix it. Communication is not just about justification. It's not just about proof of value after the fact. Communication can, in and of itself, be the value that we offer the organisation. Start small, start today. You don't have to overhaul everything, implement the D.I.A.L model, and change how you operate overnight. But the next time you get the opportunity to speak to your data department, whatever, data intelligence, data security, whatever, do an audit of what data you use to make a decision. When you're next conducting a needs analysis, consider, do you have all three data groupings? Do you have contextualized human data? Do you have hard business data? And are you inputting your professional view? If so, how are they aligning? Start small, start today, experiment, and iterate over time.